Today I'm going to discuss 10 things that I wish I had known as a beginner writer so that you can avoid some of these mistakes that I made and make progress faster. And the last tip I'm going to share with you is the most important thing you need to know if you want to become a writer. So stick around for that. So when I started off as a writer, I basically started off from scratch because I was coming from this world of, entrepreneurship and trying to create businesses. I had told myself that I wasn't allowed to read any fiction books or, consume TV or movies or any of that stuff. And because of this, I hadn't even read a novel since college. And at the same time, starting off from this place of nothing, basically starting from scratch, I was able to grow a lot over the last few years and really improve my understanding of story and my writing. But this process was definitely not perfect, and it might have been a lot harder than it needed to be. So I want to help you avoid some of these mistakes and make your process a little more smooth than mine was. So the very first thing that I would do if I was starting off from scratch as a writer today is to start learning about plot structure. This is vitally important. Learning about plot structure can give you an understanding of how you want the story to look overall. It can help you be oriented when you're writing that story because you know kind of where you are in the story. You know, okay, well, I'm approaching the midpoint, or I'm getting close to the third plot point. And if you don't have this, general understanding of these plot structure guidelines, then it can be very easy to get lost in your story and really not know where things are going. And if you want to learn more about plot structure in general, I've already created a video about the 3-act structure in the context of The Firm by John Grisham. So if you want to see that video, you can watch it right here. Not understanding plot structure was a really big thorn in my side when I first started off. You see, because I wanted to be a writer and because I wanted to learn how to write novels, I started writing a novel. Makes sense, right? Well, since I didn't know about plot structure and I was just writing, whatever, I didn't really have a direction that the book was going in. And I ended up tens of thousands of words into this novel. I'm pretty sure it was like 90,000 words, like ridiculous. And I was halfway through. I was really disorganized. I didn't know where I was going. Eventually, it was obvious that something was wrong. But if I had known about plot structure before I started writing, I would have had a better chance of actually writing a story that was more cohesive and that actually had some sort of direction to it. So that is the first thing that I would definitely make sure to do if I was starting writing from scratch. Make sure that you're understanding plot structure. Now, the second thing, which is basically the other side of that plot structure coin, is to learn about character arcs. Character arcs are vitally important because if you think about it, the plot alone is not enough to drive the story. The important thing about the story is the reader's connection with the viewpoint characters and they're feeling like they're going through the story along with them. If the reader just feels like the character is going along with the plot and doesn't feel congruent to that character's personality, then it's going to be very difficult to actually make the reader care about this story. Of course, there are stories where the characters are less important. If you think about like a typical action sort of film, the character is not what we're there for. We're there for like the excitement, the situation, to see what's going to happen. That's a much more plot-based story. But still, even in those, character arcs are relevant and they often include character arcs anyway. So I definitely would make sure that I knew about character arcs and understood them before I started writing a story. Now this next one is maybe something that people don't think about, but it's still very important. And that is to be open to changing the way that you do things. As a beginner writer, you don't really have a well-defined process, so this is especially important. But even for more experienced writers, I think you should always be willing to change the way that you're doing things to something that's more effective. If you want to see how this can actually become a problem in your writing, well, this adds into the story of how I ended up writing thousands and thousands of words that weren't going anywhere. When I was first starting out, I was looking up to writers like Stephen King or George R. R. Martin, and both of these writers are pantsers. Now, if you don't know what that is, there's basically two types of writers. There's pantsers and there's plotters. Really, it's a whole spectrum. But on the most extreme side of the spectrum, a pantser is somebody who doesn't know what's going to happen in their book before they write it. They might not even know the very end of their book. They just write and they see where the story takes them. On the far side of the plotter spectrum, they might outline everything that's going to happen in their book. Their outline might be much longer than their book actually is. And in between that, there's also various shades of plotter versus pantser. Like maybe you only outline the major plot points and you just write everything between, or maybe you only outline every scene. But how this plays into my own story is that because I was looking up to these writers like Stephen King and George R. R. Martin, and because I decided that I wanted to write like them, well, I decided that I was going to try this pantsing thing. But as I said before, I didn't really know anything about plot, I didn't know about character arcs, and because I was facing these deficiencies bodies of knowledge, I wasn't really able to write a story that made any sense or that actually went anywhere. And if I had recognized early on that my story wasn't really going anywhere, and I had been willing to give up the identity of the pantser, then I wouldn't have suffered from this problem for nearly as long. And this illustrates why it's so important as a writer to be willing to do whatever is effective. Later on, I learned that outlining was much more effective for me, and actually understanding where my story was going to go would give me a lot more clarity. So when you're first starting off, try everything and see what's the most effective for you. Try writing by the seat of your pants. Try outlining. Try even extensive outlining like the snowflake method. Try whatever it is that you need to do to help you get an understanding of your story and write that story as effectively as you can. Now, the next thing that would have really helped me in the beginning is to be willing to ask for help or even be willing to pay for it. As a beginning writer, without this really complete understanding of all the various complicated aspects of writing, it can be even easier than normal to not understand what is going on in your story and to not see the flaws of your own writing. And that's why it can be really useful to get a little bit of a more experienced set of eyes to read over your writing, because most likely there will be basic problems that you aren't aware of yet. And this person, this external source, can help you fix some of these fundamental flaws so that you can get a base of understanding to work from. For me, after I had gotten to this place of 90,000 words that were going nowhere, I really didn't know what to do because I couldn't fix this problem myself. I didn't know what was wrong. So I started looking outside myself, and eventually I decided to hire a writing coach to help me along the way and get that base, that foundation of knowledge established. And this is definitely one of the best decisions that I made, and I really wish that I had done it earlier before wasting all of these months writing this long story to nowhere. Of course, you can do this in a free way. You can meet with other writers, you can join writing groups, you can find other things like that. But I actually do think that it could be really valuable as a beginner to be willing to pay for some help. If you are paying for somebody, they are there for only one purpose: to help you improve your writing, which means that you can get feedback tailored to exactly what you're struggling with most at the time. So if I was going to start over from scratch again, I would start over from day one working with somebody who could help me along with my process and help me build that foundation as quickly as possible. Now, the next thing I would focus on if I was starting off from scratch is my self-care. You may not really understand what I mean by self-care. Really, what I'm talking about are the foundational behaviors that help give you energy so that you can actually do productive work. These are things like sleeping in a consistent schedule where you're getting enough sleep, things like eating in a way that gives you energy and makes you feel good, moving and exercising so that you can feel vibrant and lively. These foundations are vitally important to having the energy that you'll need to do the hard creative work of writing. When I first started off writing, my sleep was pretty messed up. I was eating in a way that didn't really give me a lot of energy. It made me feel very lethargic, and I wasn't moving at all. And because of this, my baseline of energy every day was relatively low, and it was hard to get myself to do the difficult work of writing. Which leads us right to the next thing, which I would advise you to do. Do not mess with burnout. Because I hadn't really cultivated a baseline of energy, I basically had to force myself in order to do writing every day. And this grinding and forcing wore me down, and I had to rely on my willpower more and more just to hit my daily writing goal. And eventually, my willpower was so depleted that I didn't even want to work on my writing at all. And it really took a while for me to cultivate that love and passion again. So it is really important to take care of yourself. If you're starting to feel tired and worn out, you're not really feeling like writing, then try to do something to make yourself excited about it. Think about your writing goals. Think about the book that you want to write. Do something to build that positive energy toward writing. And if you're still struggling with that, then you might be approaching burnout, and it might be a good time to take a little bit of a break. Now, somewhat contradictory to the last burnout point, I would make sure that I was being consistent with my writing and writing every single day. There are two main reasons why I think this is vitally important as a writer. First, if you're writing every day, you're building momentum and you're making it easier to continue writing. When you first start off, you don't have any words on the page, and after that first day, you have maybe 500, maybe 1,000 words, whatever it is. And as time goes on and every day passes and you continually write more and more, you see that number getting larger. It hits 10,000 words and 20,000, and you really start to feel like you're making progress. And by writing every single day, you're building this habit and this routine, and you don't really want to stop. You don't want to lose that momentum that you've built. The problem is that if you even take one day off, then you lose that momentum that you had. And the next day when you try to come back to it, it feels like you want to go another day without doing it. And part of you wants to write, but that momentum that you've built by not writing one day seems to want to continue, and you have to rebuild the momentum all over again. The second reason why it is crucial to write every day is because it keeps you into your story. If you take a long break from your story, even just a day, it takes longer for you to get into that story and know where you were going. But if you're writing every day, when you come back to your story, it's so easy to slip back into it because you know exactly where you left off. So you end up wasting less time getting back up to speed and are able to get into your writing sooner. Now, the next thing I definitely would tell myself if I was starting from scratch is to read more. I'm sure if you've read anybody else's thoughts on writing, you've heard this from everywhere. Faulkner says it, Stephen King says it, and plenty of other writers will tell you that reading is an important part of becoming a writer. However, not many of them actually talk about why it's so important to read. So that's what we're going to touch into a little bit right here. The first reason why reading more as a writer can be valuable is because it can help you understand what you like in stories and can help you understand what sort of stories you want to write. Maybe after reading enough, you decide what your favorite genre is and what you want to be writing on a consistent basis. Now, talking about why it's important to specialize in a genre is a little bit out of the scope of this video, but I may consider making a video about that in the future. So if you want to see a video on that, let me know. But for now, we'll just say that specializing in a genre can be really valuable for your writing career. Reading more as a writer can also help you see how modern stories are written. By reading more modern fiction, you can get a better understanding of what the fiction atmosphere is like currently, what sort of things writers are currently doing, and how they're using them so that you can apply these things to your own stories. The next thing that can make reading really useful is helping you understand genre expectations. Since you are a reader of the genre yourself, you'll know what sort of story readers are often expecting. What obligatory scenes are in every single story in this genre? What sort of tropes does this genre use? Do they overuse any that you want to avoid? Do they underuse some that might be interesting and might still fit with the genre? By paying attention, you can get a better understanding of what readers expect in this genre and what to avoid doing in this genre. The next thing I would do if I was first starting off as a new writer is smash that like button if you're enjoying this video so that YouTube knows to show it to more writers like you. Seriously, smash the like button. But the real next thing that I would do is to make sure that I'm really thinking about my reading. I would make sure that I'm learning how to read like a writer so that I can make the most of what I'm reading and take these things that I'm learning and be able to use them in my own writing. I'm actually already planning on making a video all about this topic by itself, so look out for that in the future. For now, let's just talk about why this is important and a little bit about how you can use it. The benefit of reading like a writer is that you can learn more through your reading. You can look at what professional authors and published authors are already doing in their own stories. If I was just going to give you one tip about reading like a writer, I would tell you to pay attention to your favorite and least favorite scenes in books so that when you finish the book, you can come back and look into the scene and try to figure out what made it good or bad. In what ways did the author set up this scene? What things did they do specifically in this scene? What sort of characters were present in the scene? What was the dynamic that they had? What was the mood of the scene? There's a myriad of questions that you can focus on after you've already decided to dive deep into a scene. And by doing this, you can really pick out the things that you like the most and that you would like to be able to use in your own scenes. And this is one of the most valuable tools for us as writers because first of all, we're growing our love of fiction even more by reading these really great stories. And second, we're able to cultivate our ability and improve our understanding of fiction as a whole. Now with this last tip, it's not actually something that I personally struggled with when I decided to become a writer because I'd already been working on developing my mindset for a while. But if I hadn't done this work, I definitely would have struggled with this as a beginning writer. And that is realizing that writing is a skill. It is so easy to get caught up on talent. Everybody wants to talk about talent. They always want to point to this athlete or this artist and say that this person is so talented and that's why they were able to be successful in this field. But this is severely discounting the human ability to grow and adapt. Let's look at one of those competitive environments in sports where genetics plays a huge role, professional basketball. Just to give you an idea, the average NBA player stands at a height of 6 feet 6 inches tall. Being below 6 feet is already a rarity in the NBA. However, there was a basketball player named Muggsy Bogues who was 5'3". But this guy wasn't sitting on the bench, he was a first-round draft pick. He played in playoff games, and in one of his playoff runs, he had an average score of 16 points. Can any of us really make excuses about talent? I'm sure he was fast and agile and had all sorts of natural genetic gifts, but that's not the point. In a sport where being taller is an advantage and where the taller players have it easier, there was a person who was so much shorter than the rest and was able to get to the professional level. If we just looked at his genetic package, we saw that he was 5'3", and he said that he wanted to compete at the highest levels in the NBA. How many people would believe this is possible? Everyone would say he just doesn't have the talent. Just look at the average NBA player. He does not fit in that field. But the fact is that through hard work, he was able to learn a style of play that relied on his strengths and allowed him to compete at the highest levels, even with an enormous genetic disadvantage. So if you feel like your level of talent pales in comparison to your favorite writer, realize that writing is a skill, one that you can grow, that you can improve. And sure, there's some natural talent involved, but it's not relevant because all you can do is improve as much as possible. So don't let fear that you don't have enough talent get in the way. Instead, be like Muggsy Bogues and let your life be an example of just how much humans can adapt and change. And that's what this channel is all about, growth. I'm here improving my skills and I'm sharing exactly what I'm learning with you along the way. One of the topics we ended up talking about most in this video was motivation. So if you want to learn how to cultivate the motivation to write every single day, click here. Staring contest initiated. I give up. You win.